Well, one of the things that I think was front and center for a lot of people in 2020 and continues to be is the role of our politics in our personal lives and in how it affects the workplace. That's the idea behind our first segment today. Right after the last time we recorded, I got an email from one of our listeners, and I'm very sorry that I can't remember who it was. I had made the mistake of writing down the question and then deleting the email, which I usually don't do. I'm an email saver. I save them all.
You're a hoarder of emails.
I kind of am. Like, my deleted items folder has like 13,000 emails in it. I'm not going to lie. I'll just pay for the extra storage.
Good grief.
But the email came in and said, my team is really politically divided. And she went on to kind of talk about the intense differences in the way that it's really started to negatively influence the relationships and the ability of people to work well in the workplace. And this is not the first time I've gotten this question. But it's certainly one that I think is really relevant given everything that we've come through over the past year. So I'd like to start with that, Alyssa. How do we keep people's personal politics from dividing the team?
You know, when I think about politics in the workplace, it automatically ties into something that I'm very acquainted with as a coach, which is we hold these political beliefs as aligning with our value system, as part of our moral code.
Mm-hmm.
And I think perhaps what we have more acutely experienced in the last year, maybe more than that for some of us, is that it is that feels like that real attack of you as a person against your values and your moral code when there is a disagreement or a not an agreement in terms of an issue. It feels like it's no longer an issue. It feels like you wronged me, and now we have a conflict. So it's not a matter of just disagreeing. It's a matter of you're attacking me by not agreeing with me because that's my value system.
And I think, and I think you're so right. And underneath that is, depending on where you get your news from, where you get your information from, there is in our politics a constant belief that the other side is sinister, that they are driving our country into the ground, that they're hateful, that there is a certain level of your world is going to be painful if these evil people are allowed to come into power. And I'm kind of painting with a broad brush right now, and intentionally so. But if you believe that the person whose politics are different from yours is quietly, secretly plotting to, and we've heard about QAnon in the news, and that all the Democrats are pedophiles. There's a reasonableness that moves away from our understanding of each other when politics gets involved.
Yeah.
And when that comes into the conversation, it just widens the gulf.
So what are some of the things that you have heard from leaders about their experiences of how they're experiencing this kind of divide in the workplace? How's it showing up specifically? Is it in your face, like people are like having shouting matches? Or is it this kind of like divisive, there's no longer a camaraderie, a connection that people are willingly pursuing with their colleagues because they now believe or have been told, that their political opinions differ? How are people showing up specifically with that divide?
I think it happens in a couple of different ways. I think in some places it's one or two louder voices where maybe the team have all sort of come from the same political viewpoints, but maybe someone else on the team stands alone with a different viewpoint, and that creates some strife. Or maybe there's one person who is kind of a pot stirrer and is constantly calling people out or challenging them in one way or another related to politics, and that pot stirrer can certainly do harm. Not to be confused with pot stickers, by the way, which are delicious.
Yes, they are.
Sorry to throw you off there, but what I'm seeing from a lot of leaders is some folks will say, "I just don't want to talk about it. It's an off-limits topic. Let's not bring politics into the workplace. Let's check that at the door. Believe what you want to believe, but it's too divisive and it's too touchy a subject for us to bring into the workplace." And I really get that, and I'm not of a mind that that's a bad strategy. If that's what it takes in order for people to coexist in the workplace, then maybe that is the way to go. On the other hand, though, we also have some folks who will say, well, I'm just going to try to find people to join my team who think what I think and believe what I believe. And I mean, good luck. There's the talent pool out there is already challenging enough when you're trying to find someone who is available and qualified and a good fit for your culture and your team. And when you layer that in, well, then you've also got to believe what we believe politically. In addition to being challenging, that also might be illegal from an HR standpoint. And so neither of those, I think, are sustainable. What are you hearing in terms of how it's showing up?
So this is so interesting. Whenever you were talking about the information sources, how we, get our information, what people are consuming, and then how that filters into the workplace, and leaders just trying to, perhaps one strategy is to have them leave it at the door. I don't know how feasible that really is, right? Because to me, it's part of my values system. I believe it so thoroughly aligns my beliefs with my political, that this is who I am. And so whether or not I'm overtly, saying this is what I believe and you should believe it too, blah, 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 I think it's going to seep in. So one of the most recent webinars that I had the privilege of sitting in on this week was actually on the topic of creating psychological safety in the workplace. And, there's tons of strategies and definitions out there for what that means, right? But these constructs of how we show up as leaders, and what happens when we try to bridge a divide such as this. Are we risking alienating one group or another, right, of the divide? And then in terms of also trying to show up as an individual who isn't trying to take a side, but also has to lead authentically. Like, how the heck do you do that, right? What I think is most interesting about how people experience psychological safety in the fact that they are able to express themselves and be heard in the workplace, and feel responded to in a way that does not make them feel attacked.
Yes.
So that would be the number one strategy for me, is to say, okay, how are we communicating so that we're not feeling attacked? And so again, I go back to what I know, which is my values. How do I communicate in a way that says that doesn't really align with my values? And where am I willing to say, okay, this isn't a personal attack, and acknowledging that, right? And I think that as a leader, we have to be able to address that elephant in the room, to say, this is a whole, this topic of politics, right? We have to look at this and say, it's not a personal attack. And so how can we be thoughtful and still bring our full selves to the workplace, but also create an environment of psychological safety in the workplace?
And let's recognize and acknowledge that you are coming to that with a fairly high level of emotional intelligence, and a level of emotional intelligence that not everyone else has. And sadly, in some cases, it is a personal attack. And I think this is where it gets really tricky around the politics, because
Yeah.
for some people, their politics dehumanizes other people. Their politics devalues the lives of some other people. Their politics accepts and tolerates the suffering of other people. And so it's easy to experience that as a personal attack. And I think that's what makes it such a force in the workplace that can do so much harm. But I think your point about thinking about the quality of the interaction is what's key here. When I get this question in workshops, or the first thing that popped into my mind when I got this email and saying, how do we manage this, was that as bosses, it's our responsibility to create standards for behavior and to enforce those standards for behavior in the workplace. And so there have to be some standards around the quality of the interactions that take place between people at work. And those standards have to be related to how people give feedback, share feedback, how they talk to others, how they listen to others, even things related to the words that they use and their tone of voice. And while it's the leader's responsibility to create and enforce those, the team on the whole has a role in that as well, into saying, how are we going to treat each other when we disagree? How are we going to handle conflict when it rears its ugly head? What kinds of behaviors have no place here? And so by doing that work at a kind of macro level, it doesn't become about politics. It becomes about communication. How do we treat each other? What are the boundaries? What is appropriate? And what kind of workplace do we want to come into every day? And then when everybody gets on the same page with that, when you see a violation occur, and you see the emotional charge that tends to take over when politics infuses itself into the discussion, we can start to note some of those behaviors where we say, hey, one of the things that we're really committed to here is that we don't get in each other's face and shout and name call, and we're going down that path. So why don't we all take a time out, because that's just not how we do it around here. And so it's those standards of behavior and the work that we do as a team and as leaders to get clear on what is and isn't appropriate and how we're going to treat each other.
I love all of those tools. One of the things that I have in the back of my mind is this kind of default language, right? That I don't know if it will decompress or diffuse for anyone else, but when I feel myself getting heated and getting charged and feeling personally attacked and all of the rest of the things, I can say to the other person out loud, I can feel like this discussion is going to be really, could be really engaging and interesting and productive, perhaps, but for me to be able to be productive in the conversation and continue with my level of engagement, I got to take a time out. I got to take, a different perspective, or we have to be able to set aside some time later on when I'm not feeling as emotionally connected to it as I am right now.
Yes. And be able to give yourself a timeout and to acknowledge to the other person why you're taking it, right, it's kind of conflict resolution 101.
I was just going to say, feels kind of like marriage therapy, right?
Well, and
it's just good advice.
As you're talking about that, I'm remembering a conversation with my father, who is completely politically opposite from me. And he wants to have the back and forth, and he wants to get into it, and he wants to debate, and he's like, why can't we argue? And my whole thing is, you don't want to argue, you just want to be right, and there's a difference. And what I finally came to terms with was, these are topics that for us don't make sense for us to spend time on. And I've actually said to him, I want our interactions to be easygoing. I want them to be peaceful. And given our politics, there is nothing easygoing about what either one of us thinks or believes. And so it puts our relationship in jeopardy if we will continue to allow ourselves to go and have these kinds of conversations. And so depending on the persons involved in the workplace, you may do all the good work that we just talked about with the emotional intelligence and the boundary setting and all of that, but you may get to a point where you do have to say, you know what, these couple of players aren't capable of touching that dragon. Because as soon as they touch the dragon, fire blows everywhere and everything is toasted. Overdoing my analogy.
Well, I think that is really a brave and vulnerable space for you to be able to articulate and be able to openly communicate, to say, these are the terms of what I need in order to be psychologically safe, for our relationship to be intact. And I think that that's absolutely applicable in the workplace too.
And sometimes it takes
to define those terms.
Yes. And it takes one person sometimes to say, no matter what, I'm not going to take the bait.
Right.
I'm not going to do it. Okay. It should come as no surprise that in the 15 minutes or so that we've been talking about this, we have not solved the problem with political discourse in our country, shocking as it is. Perhaps we stay tuned for a future episode of Boss Better Now, at which point in time we will maybe try again.
Give another 15 minutes. I bet you will get it.